What if the United States had embraced the metric system from its earliest days? That single shift might have produced a nation of such mechanical precision, economic might, and absurd overachievement that the rest of the world would have struggled to keep pace. When did the United States first begin to use the imperial system? The young republic never made a conscious choice to adopt the imperial system. It simply carried forward the patchwork of English units inherited from colonial times: pounds, inches, gallons, and all their inconsistencies. After independence, these measurements continued in daily use and received official standardization around 1832. At the same moment, revolutionary France was introducing the metric system, a clean, decimal-based framework built on powers of 10. Proposals for decimal measurement reached American leaders, yet the nation retained its attachment to 12 inches per foot and 5,280 feet per mile. Metric units became legally permissible in 1866 and featured in international agreements by 1875, with further discussion in the 1970s. Through every opportunity, the United States remained loyal to its customary units, a stubborn, colorful inheritance that occasionally produced costly confusion. What would have happened if the metric system had replaced the imperial system? And how would that have changed the U.S.? In manufacturing and large-scale infrastructure, the clean decimal nature of metric units would have removed the constant friction of awkward conversions between inches, feet, and pounds. Designs could have scaled perfectly without error, production lines would have run at maximum efficiency, and massive projects could have been completed in fractions of the usual time. The Empire State Building, for example, would have risen ahead of schedule and significantly taller than its real-world counterpart, becoming not just an icon but the first in a wave of even more ambitious structures that redefined city skylines across the continent. In aerospace, space exploration, and national defense, precise and consistent units would have eliminated the kind of costly miscommunications that once doomed entire missions. Calculations for thrust, distance, and payload would have aligned perfectly from the drawing board to launch. The United States would have reached the moon by 1965 and established permanent lunar bases by the mid-1980s, complete with regular supply runs that made the surface of another world feel almost routine. By the 1990s, a self-sustaining Martian colony would have been under construction, and victory parades for major conflicts would have been held not on Earth, but on those newly claimed lunar territories, turning military success into a literal off-world spectacle. In sports, entertainment, and national culture, standardized metric measurements would have created perfect fairness and global accessibility. Athletic fields, training regimens, and performance statistics would have been calculated with scientific precision, allowing American athletes to shatter records at an unprecedented rate. The Super Bowl would have become a truly worldwide event because international audiences could finally understand every yard line and statistic without mental conversion. Hollywood productions would have benefited from perfectly consistent set construction and visual effects, resulting in films so technically flawless that other countries would have begun copying American production standards wholesale, further cementing cultural dominance. In everyday consumer life, food, and public health, the simplicity of metric units would have removed countless small frustrations that once plagued daily existence. Recipes would have worked on the first try with exact gram and milliliter measurements instead of vague fractions. Body weight and temperature would have been instantly intuitive. Medical dosages would have been administered with perfect accuracy. One particularly noticeable effect would have been a sharp drop in household arguments over measurements, which in turn would have contributed to dramatically lower divorce rates as couples finally stopped debating how much a dash or a cup actually meant. In science, technology, and long-term innovation, the absence of unit conversion headaches would have freed enormous amounts of intellectual energy. Discoveries and inventions would have arrived years or even decades earlier. Practical computers and global communication networks would have appeared by the middle of the 20th century. By the 1970s, personal flying vehicles would have become common. The 1990s would have seen the first working prototypes of time machines, built simply because the underlying mathematics had finally become trivial to calculate. By the early 2000s, scientists would have casually reversed human aging. A working Dyson sphere would have been under construction by 2015. Multiple planets would have been turned into luxury vacation destinations, and other nations would have begun holding referendums to voluntarily join the United States just to access the metric lifestyle. By the 2020s, the rest of the world would have been openly debating a full planetary merger under the name Metric America, because the math had simply become too good to ignore. In this alternate timeline, the United States would have stood as the undisputed pinnacle of measured efficiency. Every major sector of society would have operated at a dramatically higher level because the mathematics underneath it all never fought against itself. Other nations would have adopted similar systems in self-defense, making the American example the global standard by default. The imperial system supplied character and a certain nostalgic charm. The metric alternative would have supplied something far more powerful: the ability to scale success without friction. The question that remains is how different the present might look if that friction had never existed, and whether the rest of the planet would have eventually begged to be measured in freedom meters too.